All right, everybody, thanks for coming out. I know there's a few people that have texted me and are going to be a little late because we had some other of our local players here that were going to be helping out, but luckily we have a couple fill-ins. Vian, would you mind helping on one of the positions? Can you help out maybe till Ashwin and Krish get here? So Marcine will do one board and then you can do the other, so we're going to keep the same position up. Can everybody kind of see from their spots? So, anyway, I know...
I give you moves, you just make them on the board for me, okay? Come, you can sit here.
He'll probably solve it before you...
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
He's pretty sharp at that stuff. Anyway, I know there's a few new people here tonight, so this is a rare occasion we get to have a special guest lecture. Normally we have tables set up and we play here every Monday night, but when we get a guest like this, we can't turn them down visiting our club. So, before I introduce him, I know a number of you have been here to the lectures in the past. Some of you are new. We do have some special guests also from the Colorado State Chess Association. So the former president, and he's done so many other things, and he's still currently the
treasurer and DCC president.
Yeah, I almost forgot. He's the president of the Denver Chess Club. But Earle Wikle, he's been invaluable to the Colorado chess community. And next to him, I've worked with him for a number of years. So some of you may not know, I took over as the editor of our state magazine a number of years ago. And so I've been working with Earle quite a bit these last few years. And I'm very fortunate, Jeff Baffo next to him here, he's a former, I believe you were the former editor of the Colorado State Informant quite a few years ago. And he's also the #1 contributor. He sends me a lot of articles that we put in our state magazine. And so we're very happy to have him. This is the first time I believe you've been to our club.
First time I can remember, yeah.
Yeah, so welcome here. And I could introduce a few other people, but I do want to make one more mention. We have a special guest here, Patrick Van Hoolandt. Van Hoolandt. And I just met him yesterday for the first time. He was playing in our Denver Chess Club Spring Classic. So his son here lives in Castle Rock, but he's a FIDE official, if I remember, and for the team in Monaco.
Yes.
You play for...
FIDE delegate for Monaco also.
Yeah.
And a FIDE master.
Yes.
And a FIDE trainer.
So it was by chance that he was playing in our spring classic this weekend. It was very nice that he took the time to come and join us here for our club as well. So we have a number of other players and some people that might be showing up a little bit late. But some of you may know Ashwin and Krish Mathimaran. They've been part of our club from the beginning. And so I was hoping to have Ashwin and them to help at the board, because at our state scholastics last month, Ashwin won the K-8 state championship, which was very special considering his brother Krish had won it the year before. So they should be showing up here shortly. But with that in mind, I don't know if some of you have known who this gentleman is. Sunil Weeramantry. He's a longtime chess coach and author, very famous for working with the Hunter School, Hunter College campus in New York, and he had recently retired as the director of the National Scholastic Chess Foundation. But he is as busy as ever. The number of kids you've coached to scholastic or to national championships?
Oh, national championships?
Yeah.
Around 200.
Yeah. So he's an incredible coach and author. I do have a couple copies of his books here. He's well known for. I have a few extra copies if anybody's interested, and later we can maybe work something out and maybe have them signed. His accolades are far too many to mention. I'm just fortunate to know him for a number of years through chess, and it's an honor to have him. This is your third lecture here.
Is it my third?
Yeah.
I think so. I
So
remember.
we've been very fortunate that he reached out and was able to come and join us again here this evening. So in the past, some of you remember his stepson Hikaru, his trainer, was with us last time. They're a little busy right now. Some of you may know that there's a candidates tournament going on inside there. So he couldn't join us this evening, but anyway, without further ado, I couldn't be more happy to introduce Sunil.
Thank you, John, but don't go anywhere. I just have to say a few words words about John. I think you guys are extremely lucky to have him here and running the club and everything. And I think this is definitely one of the more active and vibrant clubs in the country. And I think a lot of that has to do with John. So I'd like to give John a round of applause.
I couldn't do it without the help of many of our volunteers. A lot of the parents. June, you've been part of our club from years ago. But we've had so many helpers throughout the year, and that's what it takes to really keep our club going. So, but thank you. And without further ado, Sunil.
All right, well. So I have to be honest. Last night I had thought I thought I knew what I was going to talk about, and then when I didn't like it. I thought it was really bad, so I threw it all out. So I'm going to talk about something else. But the challenge in a group like this is we have both ends of the spectrum. So I'm going to try and make it interesting for all of you, and we'll see if I succeed. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is answer questions. All right, don't be shy. I don't care if you're wrong. If you're wrong, the worst thing is I'll tell you you're wrong. And I teach at the Hunter College campus schools. It's a gifted school in Manhattan. You have to test in to get in. It's like a magnet school, right? And 2 entry points. One is kindergarten, one is 7th grade. But when I first brought chess to the school, which is a long time ago, I don't even want to think that far back, maybe 45 years ago, they told me I had the wrong school. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, this is school for gifted kids. And I said, well, that's exactly why you need me in your school. So because, what I found is like gifted kids in particular, they like to be right all the time. What's 2 plus 2? Okay. For a smart kid, 2 plus 2 is always 4, right? But in chess, 2 plus 2 is not always 4. That's the problem. So what happens is that you feel threatened, and then the kids wonder, well, do I have the right answer or do I not? And gifted kids hate to stick their necks out, especially if they're not sure if they have the right answer. So they don't say anything. So I said, that's why you need me in the school, because you have to be willing to, state your opinion and defend it. And maybe you choose to emphasize certain features more than others in a position, but you have to be able to talk about it and say why you think this is correct and this is not. So as far as I'm concerned, chess has nothing to do, doing chess in school, so have nothing to do with turning out Hikarus. I mean, I told Hikaru, you hurt me more than you helped me. And it's all about critical thinking. Because, so when I was asked, when I started at Hunter, I started in 3rd grade. And then the 2nd grade teacher said, let's try this in 2nd grade and see if it eventually worked it all the way down to pre-K. So what I feel is any kid knows the difference between left, right, up, and down. If you know left, right, up, and down, you can play chess. That's my, that's where, that's my take on things. So anybody says you're too young to play because you're in pre-K, you're wrong. Left, right, up, down. You've got all the movements, and then the night there's a few funny things, and that's about it. So what's so difficult about that? And then, the whole idea of critical thinking, which is think before you move, and there are consequences to actions and all that kind of stuff. So I remember I asked a kindergartner once, what's going to happen if you cross the road without looking? She said, well, I'll get hit by a car. I said, yeah, you'll end up like a pancake. So even, thinking ahead, critical thinking is something that can be encouraged even at a very young age. It's very simple. You just have to find the right analogies. Okay, so enough of that, but I remember because I mentioned Hikaru, I remember, so I never thought Hikaru would be a chess player. And I tried my best to push him away from chess. And that's because A, I played, and B, my older son was a very good player. I mean, really good. And then he stopped playing, and Hikaru passed him, and then Hikaru got to where he's at. But at first I thought it's really unfair to try to make my son, the second one, try to live up to the first one, so let him do something else, blow a trumpet or something, but that didn't work either. So anyway, but I remember 2005, which I mentioned at the Siegmund Cup, because when we were in Copenhagen, the night before Hikaru was supposed to play, the top Indian player at the time, he left chess to do a PhD in, to do a master's in management. Maybe we'll come back today. It's terrible. So Hikaru told me the night before at dinner, he said, Dad, I think I'm going to play Queen H5 tomorrow. And I said something like, over my dead body, or words to that effect. And so he knew not to argue with me, he went to sleep. But next morning when he woke up, he had that look in his eye, I knew, I just knew. I didn't have to ask him. So he said, yeah, I've decided. I'm going to play Queen H5. So for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, this is E4, E5, Queen H5 on move 2. That's the move we tell everybody don't ever do, right? Never bring your queen out early. And my son is telling me it's a grandmaster and he's going to play, another grandmaster, and he says, I'm going to play Queen H5 tomorrow, right? So you can imagine how I felt. So anyway, he told me, yeah, I'm going to play Queen H5, but I would like you to do something for me. I said, what's that? He said, I'll play E4, he will play E5, and I'll sit for 2 minutes and not move. And in that time, I want you to get up and go into the analysis room and watch Peter Heine Nielsen's face. Right? Because Peter Heine Nielsen is a well-known grandmaster from Denmark. He's currently Magnus's main coach, right? And he was doing the commentary of the games, for this event. So I did that, and of course Hikaru plays Queen H5, and the room just goes crazy, and somebody in the back of the room starts shouting, transmission error, transmission error. But so anyway, Hikaru lost the game. Of course, to be fair, it had nothing to do with the opening. He tried to push a drawn position and he lost. But I asked him, what were you trying to prove? And he said, no, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to show that Queen H5 is just another move like anything else. So that's the story, that's the real story of Queen H5. I did try to stop him playing it, but I wasn't successful. But mainly I was being very selfish because I was thinking to myself, what are all my students going to say? How can I tell them don't bring the queen out early when my son plays Queen H5 on move 2? Against a grandmaster no less, right? So, so anyway, that's the story. All right. So those of you, how many of you were here for my last lecture, which I don't, John, when was my last lecture?
September, so about 6
September,
months ago.
yeah? So how many of you were here for my last lecture? Okay. And do you guys remember what I talked about, roughly? In general, what was the theme? I don't expect you to remember, but I thought maybe you might.
I think he remembers.
Okay. Do you remember? Yeah, okay. Annie? Double attacks are part of it, but it was more to, double attack was a way of making something else happen. So what I was talking about was the king hunt, right? Just like driving a king out into the open. So I thought this would be a good way to start tonight by giving you a position that I had mentioned in September. And so this is from a game that I played in a 1981 international. I think was one of Lev Albert's first tournaments in the US. So my opponent as white is John Litvinchuk, who was US under-20 champion at the time. He was a 24-50 rated player. And I was black. And we reached this position. This is the actual game. And what I'm going to talk about tonight, and you'll see how this relates to it, and this is not about the king hunt, but what I'm going to talk about is clearance, right? Line clearance, square clearance, okay? And if you look at this position, you don't have to be, a very experienced player to tell me which black piece or pawn is really messing up all these other pieces. Which one? Yes. I'm sorry? Absolutely, that H4 pawn is ridiculous, right? I mean, totally ridiculous. What is this pawn doing here? All he's doing is stopping the queen from coming in. Maybe if the queen could be here instead of the pawn, maybe the queen could come to G3, right? So what do you think I did? Yeah, get rid of it. If it's causing such a problem, just get rid of it. Okay, so play H3. Now, I played H3, and if my opponent, who was higher rated than me, I was about 2350, he was 2450, he thought that I was just bluffing. What do you think white should have done here? What would be the smart thing to do? Yes? Just move the king, right? Where will you move the king to? Okay, or maybe you want to block the pawn from going forward some more. So you could move the king to H2, right? You came in later, so I don't know your name. Tell me your name. I'm sorry? Spell it for me. Sidi. Okay. Hunter. Yeah, I'm a hunter. Right. And don't right. Okay. Tuni?
Yes.
Nipun.
Nipun.
Nipun. Nipun. Arjun. Chan. Emery. And Hunter, I know. And Marcy. Okay. And Niha and Ayan and Joseph. Ani. I keep doing this. Somebody told me I'm dyslexic, and I'm absolutely certain that I am. So, okay, Ani. All right. Joseph and Ajay. And this is Skin. Oh, you weren't sitting here earlier. You were. So you're trying to confuse me. This is on purpose, right? Can you spell your name for me? S-K-A-N-D. Scan? Scan. Okay. And now I forgot your name because of that. Pavan. Scan Pavan, June, you came late, so I don't know your name.
My name is Skanda.
Skanda. Scan and Skanda. You just decided to add a name. Or something like that. Reza, Ron, Patrick, Jeff, and Earle, of course. And my helper is Rian. Rian and Marcel, right?
She won the under 13
Who did?
Sit down.
You won the under 13?
She's 7 years old.
Under 13 years old?
She's
Wow,
under
that's
7.
fantastic.
She's 7 years old.
Congratulations. That's awesome. That's pretty special. You got to catch up to that Indian girl who lives in England who's like doing really well.
She's only 7.
I'm sorry, she's only 7? You're going to do that. No problem. Okay? Congratulations. Well, that's a really big deal. Yeah, I mean that sincerely because I know what it's like to It's not easy. Okay, so yeah, so the point is that white should not accept this pawn, right? White should simply play something like king here, because as long as the pawn is there, the pawn is going to interfere with the rest of the pieces with their ability to attack the white king. But you see, here's what my opponent did. He took the pawn. Now, why would a 2450 take the pawn? I mean, obviously, he thought about what I would do. You know, he's not going to just randomly take the pawn. But he took the pawn because he thought that he had an adequate defense to whatever I was going to do. So, this is what he had seen. And the reason I know this is because we did a post-mortem afterwards. That's something that people don't do nowadays. Unfortunately, you all go home and run to your computer and just, plug it in and see what the move should have been. But in the old days, when the computers weren't so good, we would actually sit and analyze with our opponent and say, oh, what would you have done if you did this or whatever else? And you learn a lot that way. So what did he think that I was going to do? Yeah, he thought that he thought I would play queen h8 check, right? And he was going to go back, and he saw that the queen would come to h4, but he saw that queen f2 was an adequate defense. And if you put that into the computer, you'll see it's a defense. Okay, there is no way really to get it. What he didn't see
Queen is a lead.
was on d8, right? Otherwise, I would play rook h8 check, of course. Okay, so what is the move he didn't see? Yes? Queen h4, right? Very good. And why is queen h4 a good move? Right. So this is where the king hunt came in, remember? So you sacrifice the queen to pull the king out, and then you check him in a way that he cannot go back. You encourage him to go forward and do a checkmate. Kind of like for those of you who remember Ricardo's game against Krasenkov, queen takes f2 check. Same idea. Okay. So, and this is force mate, by the way. And I had calculated the force mate because, can anyone do a force mate here? Do you see it? Let me ask somebody else because you've answered a bunch of questions, and I'm really glad that you are answering questions. Okay? So let me ask for one.
I think it's a
Rook to h8 check, but tell me what you see happening.
so you gotta block the king kind of
So the king cannot come backwards, so he has to go forwards. So where is the king going to move to?
he's gonna move to G5.
Okay, that is correct. But it's one thing to sacrifice the queen, it's another to know for sure you're going to win, right? I mean, you don't want to give up your queen if you're not going to win, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you going to do after king g5? Let me ask you in the back there. And what's your name? Because I didn't introduce you. So. I'm sorry?
Neil?
Neil.
Yeah.
Okay, Neil.
Rook h8, king g5, bishop f6.
Okay, slow down. Rook h8, king g5, bishop f6 check, right? Now, here's the problem. Obviously, when you go bishop f6 check is totally correct. Now go to a white square, right?
Yeah.
And you have a dark square bishop. And you're down a full queen.
Yeah.
How are you going to get him on the light square?
Rook g8.
Rook g8. But what you have to see is that g5 does not really create an escape square because rook takes g5, the king cannot go to g4, is your checkmate, right? So what that shows you is that sometimes you can make a sacrifice, and the move before the final move can be a quiet move. Rook g8 wasn't a check, right? Sacrifice the queen, but then you played a quiet move which built the mating net, right? So the one move, as long as you're constructing a mating net, then you have a very serious threat. And that's what I had to see, that even though he was on a white square and I couldn't check him with anything, I could do it in two moves and there was nothing he could do to stop it. All right. You know what's really interesting about this position, in my opinion, is the central pawn structure, the way it is. You know, how the board is divided. The whites has a whole extra queen, but that queen cannot do anything because she cannot get over to the other side of the board. Right? The central pawns are blocking it, right? So there is no way. So it's an extra queen that would have to come around maybe like this and try to do something over there. But, you know, that's not going to happen that easily. So sometimes, you know, you have to understand, you know, how the board is divided. Generally speaking, a board will be divided horizontally into rectangles. And this is more like triangles, you see? And recognizing those shapes can actually help you identify which moves, you know, should be played, okay? All right, so I just wanted to do this as a warm-up. So what I want to talk about today are clearance sacrifices. The idea of giving something up to open a line of movement, okay? And over here we could say that we made a clearance sacrifice to open a diagonal for the queen, right? And the most common way of creating, making a sacrifice to open something up is to open a diagonal. So the second example that I'd like to do, Marcin, can you help me? Can you do this position up, please? Let me just pin it up. I set it up like this, okay, please? Yeah, I apologize that when I'm working with a demo board, it's not like a screen. I can't just flip the move so that the black piece is on the bottom and the white piece is on top. You know, you just have to deal with this and just pretend you're standing on top of the demo board. So while my helpers are setting up the position, I'll tell you, so this is a position that was played by, and Patrick will know this, of course, by Alexander Adekin against Hans Joner from Zurich, 1934. And
Book of watch time is
yes, excellent. Yes, but you know, Zurich was a very active place for chess. I lived in Geneva for 8 years. I did all my secondary education in Switzerland. And so I actually, they made an exception. I even played for the Swiss team when I was not supposed to. So Zurich had very famous tournaments. Most famous tournament that was ever written about Zurich was the Candidates, was it the Candidates or British Open? 53, right? David Bronstein wrote an excellent book on Zurich 1953. David Bronstein, for those of you, a bit of trivia, played the World Championship match against Botvinnik in 51. How many of you have watched the movie From Russia with Love? Okay, so the scene in the opening of the movie was the exact position from a Bronstein game. Okay, I think the bad guy in the movie was called Bronstein. Total coincidence, of course. But anyway, yeah. So this is the position. You know, Nimzowitsch, not Nimzowitsch, she's a great player too. But Anakin, yes, this is. No, you're missing the black queen. Yeah. Can we put the black queen on? Black queen goes on G7, and there is no pawn on C5. Yeah. If I went back, if you study this game, if you ever look up this game on Megabase or something, you'll find the game is Anakin against Hans Joner in 1934 from Zurich. Okay. More recently, Zurich has had, you know, the Zurich International, which my friend Christian Isler used to organize, and they had it for 6 years, but they don't do it now. So it kind of died a natural death. I think Hikaru won the last 3 times the tournament was played. So you will find when you go through the game that at some point, black played the move G4. And that's when this bishop was over here at the time. And then eventually played a move F3 to try to shut out the white square bishop. What he should have done was to play G3 and open things up. And that would have given him very good chances of actually getting a win. So that didn't happen. The pawn was on F3. And in this position, I remember, so what struck me as really interesting, was what white did. Because if you're thinking about a move, you're never going to find it. But if you're thinking about a concept, you will find it. So the idea is, so look at the black king. What color square is the black king on?
Wait.
Who's most likely to attack that black king? The queen, perhaps, but the queen is already doing so much.
White bishop?
The white bishop, right? But I mean, that looks impossible, right? It looks absolutely impossible. Look at all those pawns on the diagonals blocking up. So what does Ali King do? Just get rid of the pawns. Just get rid of the pawns, right? E5. You want to play E5, please? E5. Yeah, take me. You can take him, one of two ways. Doesn't matter which way he takes, it just opens things up and the bishop is going to get into the game. So without going into a lot of detail, let me just tell you that in the game he took with the D pawn. He could have taken with the F pawn. We have a little time. Let's take with the F pawn and show everybody the analysis. You want to take with the F pawn for me, please? Okay, so I'm not even going to tell you the next move. You know what the theme is. Line clearance, get rid of those ridiculous pawns, right? What is white going to play now? Yes. C5, okay, C5 is coming up. F6, yeah. Let's do F6 first, because this is more active, right? Very often you'll find that the first sacrifice doesn't do as much. Sometimes you need the second sacrifice to make sure you understand why the first sacrifice was made. But do you see how that opens up the diagonals for the bishop? Right? I mean, this game is over. If he plays queen takes, his queen is overloaded because this queen cannot take the pawn and protect this at the same time. Right? So even without getting into a long analysis, you can see that if white gets his pawn with check, then the pawn on F3 is going to fall at some point, right? And then we are going to have, an extra pawn. And in the hands of a good player, that's enough to win. Oh, yeah, I was going to say that as well. Of course. You see, the other thing that Patrick is pointing out is that it's always important to examine a pawn structure. And if you look at this, you see a 2-to-1 majority over here. A, B versus P. Right? What this tells you is that at some point in the game, white is going to push A4, B4, right? And make a pass pawn. You see, and black can't stop it because his pieces are on the other side. So that combined with the bishop coming to life, I mean, think about it. What is the use of a bishop that can't move? It just looks pretty. Like Michael Steen said in his book, All Dressed Up and Nowhere to Go. It's just, it's ridiculous, right? So you may as well get rid of it. So when I finished my secondary education in Switzerland, I went to law school in England, and I was at the University of Southampton. And there was a chess teacher in the north of England, not John Littlewood. John was already playing in the British Championship. But this guy who nobody knows, he wanted to show that bishops were not really that powerful if they didn't if they didn't have the center squares. So what he did was he took a paper board and he cut out the 4 central squares, E4, D4, D5, and E5. And he put the bishop on the board and said, move the bishop, because the bishop would fall into the great big hole in the center, right? Or it would have to go like this, like a knight. And so, so what he would say is that the bishop got energized like these video game characters, get superpowers by going through some, something. And the bishop would get the superpowers by going through the center. And he would gain more power that way. And that was a very good example really of the power of the bishop. And so, a bishop that really does not have a diagonal, or if it's blocked by pawns, and you cannot move your pawns, what is the point of having the bishop there defending the pawn? You may as well get rid of the pawn and activate the piece. And if you do a real point count chess, you will say that a bishop sitting behind a pawn, it's not worth 3 points, right? You'd be better off getting rid of the pawn and opening up the bishop. Like I said, pieces shouldn't be babysitting pawns. Usually applies to rooks in particular. Okay, so I don't have to go into this. I'll just show you the rest of the game how it went. So he took like this. And, conceptually, white could do it either way. You could play C5, or you could play D6. The whole idea is to play the light square bishop to D3, open up the diagonal, and you get the crisscross attack of the bishop and the queen, with the bishop covering the one color, the queen covering the other color. And if you attack along diagonals, you'll see that leads to, very easy checkmates, right? The bishop, for all its strength, is still limited by the fact that it has to stay on its color, right? So when you have a bishop, the bishop should be complemented by something else. So if the bishop can, for example, work with pawns, like you have a light square bishop, you want your pawns on the dark squares. So you cover more territory, right? So just like that, the bishop and the queen, everybody thinks bishop-queen battery, but the queen can operate on one color, the bishop can operate on the other color. You can attack on diagonals, and it's going to be extremely difficult to defend. Okay? Anyway, Alec won this game. I don't really have to go into it. You can look at it yourself by sacrificing the D6. Okay, you know what? I'll give you it's only a few more moves. Let me give you the moves here. Let me get it exactly. Right. So. Now, bishop A4 was the move, and then the bishop came to E8, and then eventually it came around, and then black would not defend these pawns until he lost the pawns and he lost the game. Anyway, look at this game. It's a really interesting game. It's LA came against Jonah, 1934-0. Okay? All right. So you can see that you can sacrifice pawns and open diagonals for bishops or for queens, right? What's also very common in these clearance sacrifices, and I'll do one more game, then we'll take a break, and then I'll do the last game, is to get a clearance square for a knight. For a knight, you don't need an entire line of movement. You just need a square. Okay? And perhaps the most famous game I can think of that uses the clearance move for a knight was going back to so this is from the game that's very famous. It's the game Steinitz against von Baden-Leben from Hastings in 1895, right? And the critical position is what they're going to set up right here, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that. For those of you who are interested in the opening and in how the position came about, just go into Mega Database and look for Steinitz, von Baden-Leben. I actually talk about the game in my book because it made a real impact on me. But I think what made the real impact was the story, and I don't know if this is true. Okay, maybe Patrick would know, but I don't know if it's true or if it's a made-up story. That one bar the label realized what was about to happen and slipped a little note under the chessboard that said, "Saw it, went home," and pretended he was going to the bathroom and kept walking out of the building and never came back. Oh, you didn't know that story?
No, he didn't come back for that game.
He didn't come back to that, but did he come back?
He did come back and play other games.
Oh, really?
But yeah, Steinitz then went into telling the story and demonstrating that he had made like.
Yeah, no. What I had heard is that Steinitz was so upset that he didn't get a chance to show how brilliant he was.
That's right. So
That he started crying at the board, even though he was winning the game. He won the game, but he was crying because he didn't get to show how brilliant he was. And so this is the critical position. And can you put the ball on C7, C6 back to C7, please? So the last move that Black played, by the way, this comes from a very famous opening in the Italian opening. Just look it up and you will see. It's well worth studying this game. The last move that White played was rook C1. Black made the mistake of playing C6. And this cost him a really valuable tempo. But you can see obviously why he played C6, right? But so which white piece cannot easily get into the game at the moment, would you say? Which white piece has trouble getting into the game? Hunter. Okay, but we don't want to bring the king out just yet, right? Don't you think? Because I'll tell you something, Hunter. With the queens on the board, the king better stay in his castle. He's safer. Okay? If the queens are traded, he can come out, he can march out and start attacking. I'll give you Sinhalese history of the famous king who came down from the heights and then lost the battle in the plains. Yes,
I
Joseph.
believe it would be E1. Is that correct?
No. What do you mean E1? Oh, the rook on E1.
The piece that can't.
Oh, that's not active.
Yes.
Okay, so Joseph, let me play devil's advocate.
Okay.
That I would say that this rook on E1 is still has a lot of use, right? Because you're creating a battery, right? So the fact that it is supporting the queen makes it very difficult and it makes it impossible for black to castle without losing a piece, right? You wouldn't. So I would say from that perspective, the rook is useful. Okay, so that's why I wouldn't agree with you. Okay, yes.
I think the knight is not that useful because, it's not doing much there. And
You're right.
The rook has if the rook and the queen have a battery, and then the other rook is just it's good.
Yeah, it's got a lot of space, right? It's got a half-open file, right? But the knight doesn't have anywhere to go, right? I agree with you. I mean, let's take a look. Where is this knight going to go? E4. E4. Of course. Big one. So, obviously, you don't have easy forward-moving squares, right? And if you were to go to H4 with the idea of going to F5, which is not a bad idea, but he would never let you do it because he would play G6 and that would be the end of the night. He's going to sit out here, just crying for a while. Okay, all right. So this is, to me, this is one of the greatest clearance sacrifices, that was made because it's so simple, so logical, and so powerful. Steinitz said, I got to get that knight into the game. That knight is not doing anything. So what did he do?
Sacrifice.
Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead. Sacrifice the pawn, right? Sacrifice the pawn. When the pawn gets in the way, just get rid of it. Now you'll come and tell me next year, you said get rid of my pawn. I lost because I got rid of all my pawns. Okay, well, obviously, this is a very strong move because this pawn can do a lot of nasty things. You know, it can open things up in some lines, maybe it can advance. You know, this knight is going to be a target. So obviously, white took it, black took it. Right, so can we play pawn takes pawn? And why did white sacrifice the pawn? Simply to find, yes,
Yeah, knight d4.
a good square for the knight, right? Knight d4.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
But you see, all of a sudden you see that d4 is not the eventual destination for this knight. This knight is merely in transit on d4 because where is it going to? Yeah? e6, right? You know, you have a very good chess sense. I can see it already, okay? Get yourself a good coach and you'll be very good. E6.
Yeah.
Yes. Because, you know, something else in case you have not thought about this, I just want to make the point that a knight on the 6th rank, a centralized knight on the 6th rank, will stop the other player from castling on either side. Right? It's a useful little thing to know. Okay? All right. So, of course, it's going to e6. And black, of course, had anticipated this. And black knew that he would most likely not get to castle ever, which is why he played f6, because he's playing for king f7. Right? I think he went king f7 now. Go ahead, play king f7. And of course, white plays knight e6. What is the threat? What is white threatening to do after knight e6? If black does nothing, what do you think white's next move is going to be? Don't tell me. That's called this Vedant, and this is Dasha. Okay. Rook c7, exactly. He's going to play rook c7. So in order to stop rook c7, black thought he'll challenge c7 with his own rook. But he didn't want to move the A rook because he doesn't want to have to retreat his king and end up with the H rook, you know, looking sick here on H8. Right? So for that reason, he thought he will bring the H rook over so that when he takes the king back, he's not boxing that rook in the corner. Right? Well, that's a great idea. Unfortunately, it didn't work because white found this move. And do you guys, well, the little kids probably don't know this, but there is a saying in chess that the threat is stronger than the execution. Sometimes when you threaten to do something, you could have so many different threats that it's hard to know exactly what to do. So it's better to threaten rather than to actually carry it out, right? Isn't the famous story with the cigar and Linzovich? Was it Alaska with the cigar? Yeah. So, you know, you're not supposed to smoke in tournaments. So this very strong player, you know, put a big cigar in his mouth, you know, and he was, and his opponent was going crazy. He was like, he's got a cigar in his mouth. And then he said, yeah, but I haven't lit it. You know, so the threat of lighting the cigar was stronger than the actual, you know, execution. This reminds me in a match that Geneva, I used to play board one for Geneva in the Swiss team championships, and we were playing against Basel. And at the time, Basel had a very strong player who was the editor of Eurovision. His name was Zinzer. Zinzer had this really long beard. I mean, Zinzer's beard was so long, if he stood up, the beard touched the ground, right? So Zinzer was always difficult for him what to do with his beard when he's playing chess. So he would usually take the beard and very carefully lay it out on the table on the other side of the club. So my friend Richard Jeffery, who was playing for Geneva against Zinzer, just took a lighter in his hand and he just kept flicking it. And he was, you know, he didn't have a cigarette or cigar, they were just so quick. And poor Zinzer was so scared that his beard would catch on fire, that he was petrified, he couldn't move, and he just ended up really uncomfortable and lost the game very quickly. You know, the threat is stronger than the execution, right? No, I remember that because I was on the board next to that when this happened. So, yeah, his beard was laid out, so he would sit slightly to the side, the beard would be laid out neatly on one side, the clock would be on the other side. Okay. All right, so what happens here? So what move would you play with white? What is the move that can create a threat? Yes?
Rook to C5.
Rook to C5. I don't know if do you really want to trade rooks? Are you doing it because then the knight will take attacking the queen? But then the queen will move and still keep the knight on E7 protected. I think in a position like this, Hunter, the fact that this rook is on C8 actually helps white. Because what it means is that this rook isn't going anywhere. Right? If you trade off a set of rooks, you may be making it easier for him to find a square to put the other rook on. For that reason, I wouldn't trade rooks. That and other reasons, okay? All right, but good, I'm glad that you're sharing what you're thinking. It's very important, okay? All right, so, no, what did white play? What did Steinitz play in this position? Anyone? Queen G4, right? Okay, play Queen G4. So, Queen G4 has both a direct threat and an indirect threat. Right? The direct threat is obvious, right? What is the direct threat? It is going to take on G7, right? Okay, what is the indirect threat? The indirect threat, okay, who is that? So you guys, you can't play musical chairs on me because I have a system to remember names and you confuse me no end. You have glasses and a yellow shirt, you're right. Okay. Good.
Knight to G5.
Knight to G5, this kind of check, right? But, right, it's very good, but it doesn't necessarily win the queen, right? Why doesn't it win the queen? John, how am I doing for time? And I'm going to give a break after this before I go to the next game.
Just about 40 minutes total.
That's it?
40 minutes total, yeah.
40 minutes total. Okay. All right, I'm going to have to go into overdrive. All right. But Knight G5 is a threat, right?
Yeah, but King E8.
King E8 will hold the queen. But still, it's a problem for him. He's got to defend this, and I believe he played G6. By the way, why didn't he just play Queen H5 check? Why did he play Queen G4? What would he have done on Queen H5 check? Yes?
Because he could have just done King G8.
Yeah, he would have just gone back King G8 and you haven't gained anything.
Right.
I totally agree. Yeah. So that's why we went Queen G4. So when this is played, right, now the game got really interesting. And 95 check. Oh, by the way, you were state champion when? Last year? Oh, this year. He's state champion. Who's the older one? You're the older one? Okay, so you were state champion last year. And you are state champion this year. So I'll see you in the summer at the Baffo, right? Awesome. Congratulations, by the way. It's very nice. You know, I should ask. Yeah, give them a round of applause. And you should ask Mr. Brazina because he has a picture of the two of you with your parents when you were this size. And I just saw that picture, okay? Ask him for it. All right? Okay. So King E8, obviously, because the king has to protect the queen. And now comes one of the most amazing moves in chess, I think. Okay, this has nothing to do with clearance, but I may as well show you the end of the game because it's an interesting game. So he takes E7 check. And, you know, obviously the queen cannot take the rook because this queen is also attacking c8, right? So 1.11 thought he was being very clever by playing king f8. Now, you know what always struck me as very funny about this position, or very unusually interesting, is that white has 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces on the board. They're all hanging. One of them is even hanging with checkmate. Rook takes c1. The queen's loose, the rook is loose, the knight is attacked, the rook, everything is attacked. And yet white is winning this game. This is ridiculous. You know? So when he did this, so Steinitz probably said to himself, he doesn't want to take my rook, I'm giving him a free rook and he doesn't want to take it. Check him again. You don't want to take me, I'll keep checking you till you take me. Right? Okay. Well, of course it's not going to take now because still the first play rook takes rook check and then the rook is protected. So we play king g8. Play king g8 please. Alright, so now in the spirit of what Steinitz is doing, what's the next move for white? You don't want to take me? Take me! Good. Amazing move, rook g7 check. Well, he cannot come backwards because, can you play king f8 for a moment? This did not happen in the game. But if black had played king f8, can somebody tell me how white would have won? It's a little bit of analysis.
Knight.
Yeah, knight takes h7 check. Because what you want to do is you want the king to take the rook. Because then you can play queen takes queen with check. And now if the king comes back towards the center, queen takes queen is checkmate. Yeah. So, of course, this didn't happen. Go back and move. He played king h8. All right, what do we do on king h8? Okay. Take the pawn. Take my rook, please. Okay. Well, of course, he didn't. He played king g8. And now, take it again. Rook g7 check. Why? Because we know the king cannot come towards the center, he has to go to the side. But this time the h pawn has been taken, so there's an open line, right? So, you know, I like this game a lot simply because from here is a really good example of the queen and knight working together to create a checkmate. Okay? Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So the game went king h8, and now you see, you know, you always think of this queen as this really powerful piece that can go like long distances and in one move. Here you see that the winning technique is to go one square at a time. Okay? So you just go queen h4 check. He has to take the rook, there is no other move. Queen h7 check. There is only one move. Okay, go ahead. Queen h8 check. There is only one move. Queen g7 check. Yes. So he didn't want to go to d8, he went to e8. Alright, didn't make any difference. White played queen g8 check. See, one square at a time. Have you ever seen a game where the queen's gone from h8 to g7 to g8 to f7 to f8? I mean, what's wrong with it? Maybe she forgot how to move. Okay, so obviously king e7 is forced, right? And now you can play queen f7 check. Okay, and in the game, I think, well, the game didn't happen because, you know, Steinitz was just showing variations now. But if the king had gone to g8, then there's a very nice checkmating pattern here involving the queen and knight, which is very useful to know. Tell me the pattern. Knight e6 check first. Yeah, okay, so you win the queen, but you didn't checkmate me. Gee, I don't know. You won the queen though, so I have to give you some credit for it. You know, but I want you to checkmate me. Don't settle for the queen. Go for the checkmate. Yes. It's queen to f8, right? Because the rook on c1 is cutting off the escape on the c5. So what is the only way out of this? And then can you tell me the checkmate? After queen to e8? Who can tell me the checkmate? All right, the kid next to Brian. What's your name? Oh, Beyond, right. Beyond, what is the move? Knight to f7, and they keep going, don't stop. Yes? Very nice. Okay, you want to play that out? Yeah. And notice the same, sometimes it's just you can make a pattern and you can shift it like, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, It's like, you could do something similar like this if things had gone a little differently. Let me see, what was the position? It's like something like this, right? You could also have done something like this, queen d6 check, right? Forcing queen d7, and then this knight is somewhere else, right?
That would have been, knight, then knight on g5.
Knight was on g5. So now you do knight d6 check, right? And then the king has no move except to go. And you can see the same pattern, but I've killed it in like 45 degrees, right?
Just one extra.
Yeah. Checkmate, right? I think this is a very useful thing, this is why people say that the queen and knight are stronger combination than queen and bishop, very often. Because between them, they cover all movements. And, you can do things that you can't do with the bishop, okay? Let's take a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to show you again Gary Kasparov lost. Okay, 5-minute break, please come back in 5, and you guys can set up this. So position. Okay, admittedly Gary was very young. Okay, it's 1978. All right. So Gary is black. He loses this horribly, but he's playing against Vitaly Cheshkovsky, who's playing white. Okay, so given everything that I've told you so far, what strikes you as a good move for white? What would you play with? Throw some moves out at me, just
pawn b3.
Pawn b3. Okay, I'll comment on it in a moment. I don't agree, but I'll tell you why I don't like it. Yes, Ryan.
Pawn to d5.
Pawn to d5, right? What's the point?
To get knight d4.
Okay. They are the same structure, right? Okay.
It's the same square, but
Okay. Because of time, I won't go into other things. I'll just say this. If we evaluate this position, you see that d5 is a critical square. Because what is black going to do? He wants to play knight to b6 and knight to d5. And that knight is going to be very strong on d5. You'll never get rid of it. You see? And it's on an outpost, right? You can't kick it out with c4 because this pawn is down here. And from d5, he has got all kinds of threats, including, possible c3s and some kind of expansion on the inside and attacks like that. And Cheshkovsky, who was a strong GM but never got to the same notoriety as Gary. By the way, I did have, I don't know if it's a pleasure or not, but I did fire Gary. But when he called me from Moscow on his cell phone, I said, Gary, this is not working. When he was training Hikaru, and I said, you have to remember, you're not the player. You have to take your lead from the player. And, so stop trying to show your stuff and get my son to play what he wants. Go with what he wants to play. So then I had to make a very difficult phone call, and that was not to Gary, that was to Rex Sinfield, who was actually paying Gary to work with Hikaru. And I said, Rex, it's not working. So anyway, but Gary and I are good friends, and I just did a conference in New York City, just an education conference, and Gary did come and speak. So we maintain good relations, over the years, despite the fact that I, did that thing. Anyway, you can see something very interesting about this position. You know, if I had time, I would go through a full evaluation of this position. But I don't. But notice that these double pawns don't really mean anything, right? I mean, it's true that because this pawn is on f6 and not on g7, maybe h6 is weak. Maybe sometimes you may think of playing a move like queen e3 or queen b2 and ganging up on that pawn and maybe getting a past h pawn. But the critical move is to take away the d5 square from the black knight. You see? And so you have a clear unsacrifice. Play d5. Right. And now you can see, obviously, you know, if he doesn't take, the pawn can cause a lot of damage. So let's say, you know, when he takes, of course, okay, go ahead, and then knight d4, right? Yeah. And, you know, this position is very difficult for black to play, because now you can see that one sacrifice of the pawn put the white knight on an outpost. Do you see that this knight cannot be gotten rid of? This, you have a centralized knight that is on an outpost, and this is going to be extremely powerful. These pawns really don't count as two, doubled isolated, and you know, they're going to trip over each other like a three-legged race, you know. You can't really advance those pawns. Okay, so the end of the game is fascinating. Okay, let me just give you all the moves. So after d5, okay, when I studied this game myself, I had actually analyzed this because I was asking myself, okay, if I didn't know any better, what is the most logical move for white? And I thought that maybe most people would play a move like c3, you know, just kind of strengthen that position. But the problem with a move like c3 is that you leave yourself open to a kingside attack here. You know, so it's way too slow. And that knight is going to go b6 and d5. And then he's just going to play p5, p4 or something and kill you. You know, so you have no time to play c3. Even if c3 is a move that looks like it's slowing black down, the key move is the sacrifice of the pawn. Okay? All right, so pawn takes pawn, knight d4. Queen went to a6, just to try to get a tempo. And by the way, boys and girls, there's nothing wrong in a position like this with playing a move like king b1. The one weakness of long side castling is that the a2 pawn is not protected, right? So sometimes you have to spend the tempo and do something about it, and one of the best things to do, simply play king b1 and defend the pawn, right? No need to do anything fancy. So that is what Jeffery played, king b1. And now we come up to another really interesting position. I want to ask you this question. Black versus bishop keys. Comments? Anybody? Do you take? Do you not take? What do you do on bishop e6? What do you do? Yes, yeah.
Maybe you take it, and after queen takes, you play knight d5, attacking the queen, and the a7 pawn.
Yeah, maybe. But you know, I don't know if that's really the best play. What if you know, you could just move the queen somewhere, right? I mean, but you want to take that pawn. I don't know if taking that h6 pawn is really such a good idea. Because when you take on h6, your knight is kind of pinned down, right? You know, so you can take the pawn. Sometimes, you know, the trick with your opponent's weaknesses is don't be in a hurry to capture it. When you capture the weakness, then the weakness no longer exists. If the weakness exists, then the pieces often get tied down to the defense of the weakness. Understand? So sometimes you're better off leaving the weakness, forcing him to use his pieces to defend the weakness, and taking later. Again, threat is stronger than the execution. Okay? So I don't agree with bishop takes bishop because to a certain extent you're helping him centralize his queen. Any other suggestions? Yes, Oliver. I mean, Hunter.
Knight to F5.
Knight to F5. The drawback to this is bishop takes bishop, right? Wouldn't you say? And then if you take back with the pawn, now you have double isolated F pawns as well, right?
You don't need to take it back because then you can move knight to E7.
But then he just moves his king to B8. And then you'll have to take back sooner or later. Because if you don't take back, you've given me a free piece, right? Okay? So that's why I'm not so sure about that, okay? So, one of the hardest things to do in chess is to learn when to take and when not to take. Sometimes you don't take. Sometimes it's better to let them take you. But we don't want to encourage him to take us if we have to take back with the F pawn. Agreed? Why do we want to give ourselves those double pawns? Right? Taking back with the F pawn makes no sense. So, we don't want to take back with the F pawn, but we don't want to take his bishop either and centralize his queen. What should we do? You tell me. Oh, I don't like G4 because you are exposed to rook G8, but queen F3 would make a lot of sense, yes. Right, do you see why I think, on the balance, if you are playing quickly, you would not want to go to G4 because you don't want to have to calculate the consequences of rook G8. Okay, but queen F3, your queen is safe, right? And what you're saying is fine, take me if you want, I will take back and now you don't get to centralize your queen. Right? I think sometimes it's decisions like this that are the tough decisions to make, that make all the difference in a game. And again, this doesn't look like a big deal, but it is a really big deal. Okay, so Tchaikovsky played queen F3. And Kasparov took the bishop. White took back with the queen. Black played knight E5. Okay, I have a question to everybody. E5 looks like a good square for the black knight, right? D4 looks like a good square for the white knight, right? Which is a better square? Yes. Why?
Because it's an outpost and the black knight on E5 can also get kicked because the
See, I knew you were going to be good. She's absolutely right. The difference is that D4 is an outpost, but E5 is not an outpost, right? At some point in time, the F pawn could go to F4 and kick that knight out. The black knight cannot stay on E5, but the white knight can stay till he dies on D4.
They will be closing in 20 minutes.
Okay, so that means gives me 5. Okay.
10.
All right. Okay. So let's move on. So you understand that, right? That the white knight on E4 is stronger than the black knight on E5. Okay, so black played the move. Sorry, it's white's turn. White played queen check. Queen F5 check, king B8, and kicked the knight out with F4. So the point of queen F5 check was to be able to kick the knight out of the outpost. Now black played knight D7. He can't hold everything, no matter where he goes, he's going to run into some kind of trouble. And now you just take the pawn, he takes D5. So that pawn that you sacrifice with D5 is actually coming back. Yes, Jeffery.
Why not knight C6 to challenge that knight?
Yeah. F7 would be.
And the queen was on.
Oh, queen was there. Yeah, F6 would be. Yeah. And then that will also protect the knight. Yeah. And then, that gives you access to both these pawns.
There's a pawn on
Or there's a pawn on d5, oh, then even better. Right? Okay. All right. So let's go back to the game. So queen, so pawn f4, knight d7, queen takes d5. And now black thought will be tricky. Knight e5, wink, wink. But of course everybody sees that. Okay. Queen e4. All right, again, remember I said that queen f3 was one of the hardest moves to think of in chess, you know. But a move like this also, this is a hard move. Like, where do you put the queen? So you have to guide yourself to a certain extent by general principles. If you can centralize, if you can keep your queen centralized, you're much better than decentralizing. E4 is one of the most central squares you can think of, right? So E4 makes a lot of sense. All right, queen E4. And then black played knight G4. And by the way, don't be like some of these chess players who think that if you're a real macho kind of chess player, you have to keep moving forward. Okay? Sometimes going backwards is the smartest thing to do. Okay? You know, it's not like you put your head down and you charge, you know. The chess doesn't work like that. The correct move here is to stop knight f2. The best way to do that and to turn the tables on black is to play queen e2. And queen e2 is more accurate than queen f3. Can somebody tell me why queen e2 is more accurate than queen f3? Okay, very quickly. Obvious, I think. Yes? No, so whether you go to f3 or to e2, you're attacking the knight and you're stopping knight f2, right? But the point is, if you keep your queen on the e file, you can follow up with a move like rook e1 and take control of the file, right? And on an open board where there is only one clear open file, the person who has a better position is the person who controls the open file, because that is your way into enemy territory. Okay? Watch Bridge Over River Kwai, World War II. It was filmed in Canada.
Absolutely. Botanical Gardens.
The knight has no square.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. Anyway, you know what? I'm not going to have much time to finish this in the way I would. But look at the game. Look at it on Megabase. It's Cheshkovsky Kasparov, 1978. It was I don't remember it was the finals or the semifinals of the Soviet Championship, but it was, you know, it's part of that, you know, that cycle. Okay, it's a very, very interesting game, and of course, White did not let go, and he just made mincemeat out of those kingside pawns and just destroyed. Poor Gary could not have been very happy about this, you know. But anyway, yeah, it's a very useful game. But the key point of the game is the move pawn d5. The clearance sacrifice, which simultaneously took away the best square for the black knight, but created a perfect square for the white knight. You see? And so you can't think simply in terms of points. You have to think in terms of position and what the pieces are doing. Right? Too many kids right now, you know, are thinking in terms of points. Am I up 1 point? Big deal. You could be up 1 point. I mean, if points were the only thing that mattered in chess, gambits would not exist. Okay? Think about that. All right. John, before I start, because I know what the time is like, and they'll come and chase me out of here in a moment. So for those of you who know the story, or you may or may not know the story behind this book. So the first edition, I published this in '93. I took it to Random House, and the editor said to me, the book is too long, will you take out all those wrong answers? I said, you don't get it, do you? And I said, if you make me take out the wrong answers, I would rather you not publish it. You know? So I won in the end. All the wrong answers are still here. And I think that's the real value to the book. What I tried to do with the book, I was always impressed with logical chess move by move by Irving Chernev, simply because he said something about every move. Okay, well, he went to a ridiculous extreme, and I don't have to say something about every move, but I always felt there wasn't enough text in chess books, because you had to explain things, like what are you thinking, and so that's why I tried to put a lot of text. I asked a lot of questions and so forth. So if you enjoy the book. So then 25 years later, I said, did I really write that 25 years ago? That's a bit of garbage. No, not quite that bad. But I said, so it's time for a rewrite. So the new book has a blue cover. It was published like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. It's still selling very well on Amazon. And I rewrote it. I added 2 new chapters, and I brought in new players like, Wesley Slow and Bingley Wren and, all those people. So I even have a game, Ricardo Lost to Madness, and everything. So anyway, so that's the story behind this book. The other one, this I think is my better work, but unfortunately you can't buy this, it's out of print. So I just talked to the publisher, and they are figuring out a way to put another 2,000 or 3,000 copies in circulation. So hopefully that'll happen some point. But that book, the reason I'm interested in that book is because I wrote it for the school that I'm teaching in, because chess is part of the curriculum, and I needed a text to go with, teaching chess, and the book, provides that framework, And by the way, one last thing, the chessboard that you see on the cover here, this is made out of the material called amber, so it's pretty expensive, right? It belonged to King Charles I of England. When Charles was led to his execution, in his right hand he carried the Bible, and in his left hand he carried that chessboard. That chessboard saw his head being chopped off. So, it's actually, I traced it to about 20 or 30 years ago. It belongs to a private collector. It's come down. And it changed hands for just under $800,000. So it was a lot of money, But it did see a king's execution. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. John, I think I'll stop now.
Thank you, everyone. We got about 10 to 15 minutes here. We'll start putting everything back, and so we still have a few minutes if you want to come up and talk with Sunil, and we'll be back to our regular club meeting next Monday.
Oh, look it up my son. Need help? Hello?
I got this over there. We're going it. It's beautiful.
That's what I was doing.
They're all like.
Keep her playing, she's very good. Yeah, come on. Awesome. Very good. Good luck.